Environmentalists say they'll continue to track the Japanese whaling fleet despite Japan's decision to suspend the annual whale hunt. A Japanese fisheries agency official says the factory ship Nishin Maru halted operations last week over safety concerns for its crew. Earlier on Morning Report, the head of Sea Shepherd, Paul Watson, said his group won't be giving up.
Japan actually didn't suspend them. We shut them down, and they haven't been able to whale since. And they're saying their suspension is, it could be 2 days, it could be 2 weeks, it could be for the season. We don't know. So as long as they're down here, we'll continue to block them.
Well, joining us now is a spokesperson for the Institute of Cetacean Research, Glenn Inwood. Mr. Inwood, has Japan stopped whaling for this season altogether, or is it just a temporary thing?
At the moment, it is just a temporary thing, Jeff. They have made no decision yet to leave the Antarctic, but it's a completely understandable decision. Sea Shepherd has become more violent. A recent incident where a rope was entangled in the Yushin Maru No. 3's propellers I think they got frightened by that. That could have been very serious, and if the propeller became disengaged from the vessel, it would certainly sink it. So now that the Sea Shepherd has found the Nishin Maru, I think Japan has been left with little choice, given the increasing violence of the group and the need to protect the crew and vessels.
So they've moved 2,000 kilometres away from the whaling grounds, and if they can shake off the pursuers, they'll go back?
At this stage, I think that is what the Fisheries Agency of Japan is considering. I think if you were the government of New Zealand, this is certainly not a good outcome at all, and I think they should be very concerned about these developments, because while the government wants to eliminate Southern Ocean whaling, and that's what they've reaffirmed when Julia Gillard was here yesterday, I don't believe that the New Zealand government or even the Australia one wants to do it this way. They would rather achieve the end of whaling through diplomacy, not through aiding and abetting what is essentially a terrorist group to commit criminal acts on the high seas through allowing them the use of our ports and services.
Can we take the point that was made earlier by a BBC correspondent in Japan, that in fact there are fewer and fewer people are eating whale meat in Japan, and that there is a considerable stockpile in warehouses?
There is a considerable stockpile of all food in Japan. There is currently 60,000 tonnes of beef stockpiled in the Japanese market, and there's around 80,000 tonnes of pork stockpiled.
Why?
So the 5,000 tonnes of... Why? Because Japan has a very serious issue over food security. After 9/11 and 10 years ago, when the United States shut off its ports and services, and imports and exports, I think Japan was left with a month or two of food for its own people. So it has very serious concerns about food security. You've got 130 million people in what is essentially islands that are no bigger than New Zealand. So so they essentially stockpile everything. There is no issue with demand, I believe, in Japan. I think there may be some issues with the supply chain, but I think demand for whale meat is still very high in Japan.
Thank you for joining us. That's Glenn Inwood, the spokesperson for the Institute of Cetacean Research.
It's whaling season in the Antarctic following pressure from Sea Shepherd activists, so that's the way it's been written. Glenn Inwood is a spokesman for the Institute of Cetacean Research, an NGO in Japan that specialises in the biological and social sciences related to whales. He's with me now. Glenn, good morning.
Good morning, Marcus.
You still getting paid?
Absolutely.
So they're still serious about whaling?
But hugely disappointing for the government of Japan, I think, but it's a completely understandable decision. Sea Shepherd has become more violent in the last few years, and I think the latest incident recently where a rope was entangled around one of the propellers certainly gave it a bit of a scare, especially if the propeller disengages, you could have a ship sinking very quickly. So now that the Sea Shepherd has found the Nishin Maru, I think they were left with little choice given the increasing violence of the group and the need to protect their own crew and vessels just to suspend it at this stage. But there is no decision yet on leaving the Antarctic entirely for this season.
So Glenn, this is not pulling out, this is done for the safety of the crew?
This is done for the safety of the crew. They cannot have this group continually attack and commit these criminal actions under maritime law.
But Sea Shepherd seems committed. I mean, it seems to be a very effective protest.
Oh, absolutely, it is. And I think really if you were the government of New Zealand or the government of Australia, this is not a good outcome at all. I don't think, I think they should be very concerned about it. You do not want to end Japanese whaling in the Antarctic in this manner. If you want to end it, and I would suggest that New Zealand and Australia want to do that, they've reaffirmed that when Julia Gillard was here yesterday, but They want to do this through diplomacy, not through allowing Sea Shepherd to use New Zealand ports and New Zealand services to then go on to commit criminal acts on the high seas like ramming ships.
What will the Japanese do to ramp this up? I mean, we always talk about face saving for them. What will they do to manage to gather whales? I mean, obviously they're dedicated to it. What other options have they got, Glenn?
Well, I don't think that when it comes to the Antarctic, I think the decisions are going to have to be made, and they're going to be very difficult. I think one of them is that it's going to be difficult for Japan to leave the Antarctic while Australia is taking legal action against them at the International Court of Justice. Now, even though everyone in Australia and New Zealand are pretty sure that that case is going to lose, because the Whaling Convention is explicitly clear that Japan is not committing any breaches of international law. The reality is that Japan itself is going to have to make some very tough decisions on whether it can continue to allow Sea Shepherd to harass its vessels like this. Now, it will do one thing. It could resolve their stand for next year to make sure that protection measures are well and truly in place to avoid this happening in the future.
What can you tell me about what's happening back in Japan? What's happening to their attitudes towards whaling? I see that whale meat sales have fallen. A black market in whale meat has been exposed.
I don't think there's any problems with demand for whale meat in Japan. There may be some issues with the supply chain, but in regards to the stockpile of around 4,000 tonnes, look, Japan has very serious concerns about food security. There are currently 60,000 tonnes of beef stockpiled in the Japanese market. There are 80,000 tonnes of pork. Nobody is suggesting that Japanese people do not want to eat beef or pork. What it is really a concern for food security, and so therefore they stockpile it. When 9/11 occurred 10 years ago and the United States closed imports off and also exports, I think that hurt Japan quite hard, and it got down to the point where they really had about a month or two left of food for the Japanese people. So I think they take food security extremely seriously, and that is their reason for being in the Antarctic.
So, Glenn, you're saying this is not the end of whaling?
Look, I don't. As I said, there are going to have to be some very tough decisions made in Japan about taking responsibility themselves. They're not going to get any help from the Australian government. They certainly don't appear to be getting much assistance there in stopping Sea Shepherd from New Zealand, so they're going to have to deal with it themselves. Thank
you so much, Glenn. Glenn Wood there from the Institute of Cetacean Research. It is 16 away from 8 o'clock.
Okay, Melissa, there's an interesting public relations campaign going on at the same time.
That's right. The Japanese public at the moment is getting unprecedented access to the Japanese Coast Guard in what appears to be a bid to drum up support for them. The Coast Guard is the organisation that arrested Pete Bethune when he was brought into Tokyo by the Shonan Maru coup in March. Yesterday they held an open day for several thousand Japanese locals where they took them out to sea and put on a demonstration of how the Coast Guard deals with intruders. It was basically a show that included gunfighting and water cannons, and it showed how they go on board and arrest a pirate. But interestingly, what they also had was a poster of when Pete Bethune was arrested by them, which shows him handcuffed and being led down some stairs wearing a hood.
Melissa, thank you.